In tonight's news, the Attorney General of the State Security Court opens an investigation with radical Muslim cleric Abu Qatada, who arrived today from Britain to face trial on terrorism charges. Egypt's ambassador to the United States says what happened in his country was not a military coup and argues it's unlikely the U.S. would pull its $1.5 billion in military aid. And a sun-powered airplane touches down in New York City, completing the final leg of an epic coast-to-coast journey that began from San Francisco 2 months ago. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Marking the 41st anniversary of the late King Talal's death, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Hussein visited his tomb. Also visiting the monument to pay their respects were the Prime Minister, cabinet members, speakers of the upper and lower houses of Parliament, as well as civic and military officials. Visitors recited verses from the Holy Quran and laid wreaths on the tomb. The Jordanian Kurdish Investment Forum opened in Amman today with the participation of public and private sector representatives from both sides. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour opened the forum and spoke about Jordan's investment climate and its position as a gateway for trade with countries in the region. He said economic reform and market legislation, as well as free trade agreements and other integration measures, give Jordan an edge in the region and provide an attractive climate for foreign investors. Mansour said Jordan is to further promote trade relations with Iraq, namely the Kurdistan region, in the tourism, medical, and educational fields. A number of memoranda of understanding have been signed between the two sides, covering the health, public works, housing, agriculture, and communication sectors. Other agreements have also been signed between private sector institutions that will support socio-economic development and serve to further enhance cooperation between the two sides. Jordan's export to Iraq until the end of April this year have reached a value of $390 million, while imports from Iraq stood at $85 million. The Attorney General of the State Security Court opened investigation with radical Muslim cleric Abu Qatada, who arrived today in Jordan from Britain to face trial on terrorism charges. The Attorney General ordered Omar Mahmoud Uthman, known as Abu Qatada and once famous as Osama bin Laden's right-hand man in Europe, under custody for 15 days, along with other suspects at Muggar Rehabilitation Center. Abu Qatada left Britain after a long legal battle and years of British government efforts to deport him. His return was made possible by an extradition treaty adopted by Jordan and Britain last week. Jordanian officials said he will face a fair trial. Over to Egypt. Thousands of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi protested outside his palace of detention in Cairo, while opponents continued to march through the capital to support Morsi's ouster, accused the United States of pro-Islamist bias. Clashes between supporters and opponents also continue in central Cairo and many other cities and towns as the world looks on with increasing alarm at the situation. Yesterday, attempts to appoint Mohammed al-Baradei as interim prime minister failed after the hardline Islamist Noor party objected. Lu'ay Balqar has an update.
Egypt's drama far from over. Funerals were held in Egypt for those who died in clashes between groups of pro- and anti-Morsi protesters. At least 36 people are known to have died in street battles that took place in the capital and across the country, and more than 1,100 were injured. In signs of frustration, anti-Morsi protesters called for mass demonstration nationwide to show further support for the military's decision to oust the Islamist president, while the Muslim Brotherhood also called for another protest. Some Cairo residents who witnessed the violent clashes over the past days condemned those who treated their fellow countrymen as targets and are asking protesters to try and act peacefully.
Egypt keeps its door open to all, and we have talks, but any acts of terror on this ground shall fail and be condemned.
This man urged all the Egyptians to act in a peaceful manner and not to turn into violent clashes. Activist groups behind the protest that helped bring down Mohamed Morsi warned the country's new leadership not to defy revolutionary demands.
We say to the current president and to the future prime minister, you have two choices. Either you are with the revolutionaries or you can be with the enemies of the Egyptian state and the Egyptian people.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin cautioned that Egypt could be on the verge of a civil war, and he hoped that the Egyptians will avoid serious fate.
No matter how sorrowful this sounds, Egypt is moving in the same direction as Syria. I would like the Egyptian people to avoid this possible negative development.
In Washington, Egypt's ambassador to the United States, Mohammed Tawfiq, ABC's This Week, what happened in his country was not a military coup, but that the army needed to step in to keep violence on the street from spiraling out of control. He said Mohamed Morsi has failed to act as president for all Egyptians and could have begun a dialogue with the protesters, but instead incited his supporters to violence. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
Meanwhile, an explosion hit an Egyptian pipeline yesterday in Al Arish in Sinai following a series of attacks on security checkpoints that continued over the past several days. It was not immediately clear who was responsible for the attacks, nor if they were in reaction to the ousting of President Mohamed Morsi on Wednesday. The pipeline that supplies gas to Jordan has been attacked 16 times since the overthrow of former President Hosni Mubarak in 2011. Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources Malik Kabariti stated that the pipeline explosions will force the electric company to use oil derivatives to compensate for the disruption in supply. He noted that the measure will further increase the cost of electric power generation and consequently add up to losses incurred by the National Electricity Company. According to the minister, contacts are underway with Egyptian officials to assess the damage on the pipeline and the time needed to get up and running again. And to the Syrian crisis, the Syrian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood is calling the United States and Europe to deliver promised military support to the rebels after the opposition's national coalition voted in a new president. Milham al-Drubi, a senior member of the Syrian Brotherhood, said there had been no official change from foreign powers in terms of promises to step up aid to the rebels. He said the coalition's election was brought the Saudi-backed tribal leader Ahmed al-Jarba to the helm should give the West the confidence now to send promised aid. Meanwhile, on the ground, government forces continued heavy shelling of Hims. Videos showed white smoke rising from parts of the city near the 13th century Khalid bin Walid Mosque amidst constant gunfire and explosions. Enter Turkey, where thousands of anti-government protesters gathered in Istanbul's Kadikoy district to attend what they said was the first annual gas festival organized to denounce a police crackdown on park protesters. Anti-government slogans were chanted as a mock water cannon sprayed water on them. Turkish police dispersed hundreds of protesters in Istanbul's main Taksim Square yesterday to prevent the crowd from entering a park that was the center of protest against Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan last month. Two more people have died of the SARS-like coronavirus in Saudi Arabia, bringing the number of deaths from the disease to 38 inside the country. The Saudi Ministry of Health said a 2-year-old child died in Jeddah and 53 man died in an eastern province where the outbreak has been concentrated. Another 3 people have also been confirmed as being infected with the virus, bringing the total number of confirmed cases inside the Saudi kingdom to 65 since it was identified a year ago. The World Health Organization said the virus has not yet reached pandemic potential and may simply die out. U.S. officials examined flight information recorders and began investigating the crash of an ASEAN airline Boeing 777 that burst into flames upon landing in San Francisco yesterday. 2 young passengers were killed in the crash and more than 180 people were injured. The crash was the first fatal accident involving the Boeing 777, a popular long-range jet that has been in service since 1995. We get more in this Reuters report.
U.S. investigators are examining flight data recorders as the investigation gets underway into what caused the crash of an Asiana Airlines Boeing 777 in San Francisco Saturday that killed 2 young Chinese passengers and injured more than 180. National Transportation Safety Board Chairman Deborah Hersman said it's too early to determine what went wrong.
We need good evidence. We need to document that. We need to corroborate that with information from air traffic control tape, radar, flight data recorder information, cockpit voice recorder information.
Asiana Airlines President and CEO Yoon Young-do said mechanical failure didn't appear to be a factor. Crash survivor Vedpal Singh said it was a hard landing.
There was a loud noise and the whole plane shook. So we thought, that's, something terrible.
Pictures taken after the crash showed thick smoke billowing from the fuselage. TV footage later showed the aircraft gutted and blackened by fire. Much of its roof was gone. Passenger Ben Levy.
I couldn't see any fire at the back of the plane, and by the time I went out through the front, I saw more smoke in the front. Maybe some flames, but the beginning of it, and then the firemen were already on the spot.
Government officials in Seoul say the 2 deaths were both teenage female Chinese nationals who had been seated at the rear of the aircraft. San Francisco fire officials said 49 people were hospitalized with serious injuries. Another 132 suffered moderate and minor injuries.
And a successful coast-to-coast journey in the United States on an airplane entirely powered by the sun. The sun-powered airplane touched down in the New York City late yesterday, completing the final leg of an epic coast-to-coast journey that began from San Francisco 2 months ago. The project of the experimental aircraft, with a wingspan of a jumbo jet and of a small car, began in 2003 with a 10-year budget of $112 million. We get more in this report.
A plane lands in darkness in New York after a flight powered entirely by the sun. Named the Solar Impulse, the successfully completed a journey across the U.S. when it touched down at John F. Kennedy Airport Saturday night. The last leg of a voyage that began more than 2 months ago was shortened after an 8-foot tear appeared on the left wing.
And this is a full success, because actually the only thing that failed on the plane is a piece of fabric on the wing, a piece of normal fabric. But everything that had to do with energy, solar cells, batteries, electrical motors, all that is a complete success. We have no failure.
With 12,000 solar cells in its wings, it's the first solar-powered plane capable of operating both day and night to fly across the U.S.
And to Spain's San Fermin Festival, famous for its running of the bulls. The week-long celebration, which attracts tourists from around the world, kicked off yesterday in Pamplona, but the actual running of the bulls began early this morning. Runners herd the bulls in the early morning through the city's narrow medieval streets into the bull ring in a tradition that goes back to 1923. Jordanian Ubaid Al-Kasbi and Ihab Darwish reserved a place in the finals of the Asian boxing tournament hosted here in Jordan. Al-Kasbi beat Japanese Fujita King 3-0 in the 56-kilogram category and will next face Kyrgyzstan champion Amor Bek. Darwish beat Mirza Bek Hasanov of Uzbekistan in the 91-kilogram category 2-1 and will now go head-to-fist with Kazakh champion Anton Bishkov for the finals. The boxing tournament will last until the 9th of this month.
كابتن علي عبد الزهرة يقول هو الفائز. إذا إيهاب.
Andy Murray ended Britain's 77-year wait for a men's single winner at Wimbledon after defeating Novak Djokovic in a pulsating contest. Murray triumphed 6-4, 7-5, 6-4 against the six-time Grand Slam winner. Serving for the match at 5-4 in a dramatic third set, Murray wasted 3 match points before being forced to stave off 3 break points. But the home favorite finally, at the 4th time of asking, secured the point to ensure his place in Wimbledon history. World champion Sebastian Vettel finally tasted Formula One victory on home soil in Germany, the Grand Prix that sent him 34 points clear of Ferrari Fernando Alonso. Championship rival Kimi Räikkönen was second for Lotus, only a second adrift after a late tire change delayed him in the final few laps, while teammate Romain Grosjean was third. There were none of the explosive tire failures that raised safety fears at last weekend's race, but a stray wheel from Mark Webber's Red Bull injured a cameraman, and Jules Bianchi's car momentarily caught fire and then rolled towards oncoming traffic after the Frenchman had scrambled out.
Jimmy, you must only talk after turn 12. We cannot hear you anywhere else.
And for a quick look at weather, fair conditions continue with for the rest of the night with northwesterly fresh winds. Tomorrow it will be hot in most regions with northerly moderate winds changing to brisk in the afternoon. In the Gulf, very hot and dusty conditions prevail with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. The Attorney General of the State Security Court opens an investigation with radical Muslim cleric Abu Qatada, who arrived today from Britain to face trial on terrorism charges. Egypt's ambassador to the United States says what happened in his country was not a military coup and argues it is unlikely the U.S. would pull its $1.5 billion in military aid. And a sun-powered airplane touches down in New York City, completing the final leg of an epic coast-to-coast journey that began from San Francisco 2 months ago. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.